Hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Cioffi on this Thursday. Very, very interesting things are happening in the models over the last several days. We've been touching on them to some degree, but it really has gone almost full tilt now in terms of the pattern as we go into the long range. I've been making the point that I think the storm from October 29th, the major storm that moved up the East Coast, really started the ball rolling as far as let's call it a pattern upheaval, and that it was going to be a process. We got into, the deep trough from that weekend, of course, pulled out. Then we had one more last taste of the ridge in the east, and now that's gone. And we are, I think, going to be going into a very impressive looking blocking pattern, which would argue for an early onset of wintry conditions across certainly the interior Northeast and the Great Lakes, and also causing below average temperatures up and down the eastern seaboard if it plays out the way some of the models have indicated. All the models seem to have this. And let's take you there first, step by step, because we want to start with what's going on at the moment as we watch some very cold air that is dropping down out of Canada. So we're going to start with the latest run of the GFS model, and I'm going to pull up the temperatures, because we are going to see some very cold or very low temperatures. That's probably the better way to describe it. For the next, during the day Friday, lasting into Sunday, certainly for my neck of the woods. And here it is, the actual surface map. You can see the weather front. There's actually two fronts. There's a weak one that's coming through this evening, and there's chilly air behind it. The actual polar front or Arctic front is back in western New York this evening, and that is going to be moving its way eastward. And that really brings in the core of the cold air. And you'll take a look here. During tonight, there's going to be some lake effect snows and snow squalls in upstate New York. That front starts to really push that cold air. The northerly winds kick in during the early morning hours. There's the big high that is up on the western shores of Lake Superior. And it's pretty much a straight north wind from northeastern Canada all the way down into the Carolinas. In fact, there's northeast winds clear down into northern Florida. So this cold push is going to be felt pretty far south. The high builds into the east, then up into New England. So it's Saturday night into Sunday. Sunday morning might see another round of record lows, especially in areas that have clear skies and light winds. So we'll have record lows Saturday morning and Sunday morning. Not so much Friday. There might be some records that'll go by for Friday. If those records will have to be set between 6 p.m. and midnight, because we'll actually be warmer overnight into Friday morning than we will be Friday evening into midnight. So we'll see how many records go by the boards, but Saturday morning certainly, and Sunday morning probably some more. Notice, by the way, there really isn't too much happening as far as the next weather system is concerned. It's very weak. So there might be some clouds as temperatures moderate into early next week. And much of next week is going to be quiet in the east. There's another weather front coming in for Wednesday night into Thursday. Again, another weak one. And then after that, this is when we start to see that blocking pattern taking hold. Now, I'll come back, by the way, to talk about the west in just a second. Let me just stop for a moment. And I just want to at least acknowledge everyone with a big hello. I hope the audio is good, and I will come back to you and we will chat a bit more about this. So just stay with me. I'm just going to go back now and we'll talk more about these maps. Let's backtrack. Let's go back to the beginning, and I'm going to pull up the temperatures so we can take a look at that. And I think I may use the NAM with this. So give me a moment here. We'll use the NAM model and look at the temperature profile of the NAM model, which I think will probably work better. Trying to find where's that 2 meter temperature. And there we go. Okay, so you know what? Let's tighten up on the east, and we'll start with tonight. And you can see the advance of the cold air. The blue starts to freezing and below. So here's Friday morning, and notice that as we go through the day Friday, temperatures go nowhere. They will be steady, or in some cases falling into the 30s. And now we are into Friday afternoon, and you can say goodbye to the 30s and head into Friday night, Saturday morning. So here's the midnight temperatures on the NAM down in the low 20s. So that's why I think there might be a few places that could see records go, the Friday records go, when the lows for Friday are set probably at 11:59 p.m. and then we'll hit bottom Saturday morning with temperatures in the teens and low 20s. You can see a lot of teens up and through upstate New York and up into New England. You've got temperatures. I'll widen this so you can see how far south this goes, but you can see with a 32-degree line Saturday morning all the way down into South Carolina and even into northeastern Georgia, on up through much of Kentucky and into parts of Tennessee. So this is a really, really strong cold push for this time of year. And during the daytime Saturday, many areas up in my neck of the woods will have a tough time getting back to 40. This is for now going into Sunday morning. A lot of the temperatures Sunday morning are going to be dependent on cloud cover. And by the way, to show you just in terms of above and below normal with all this, this is, we have to remember the time of year here, and the time of year, an air mass like this in January, and we're talking probably temperatures down to single digits and zero, and daytime temperatures having a tough time getting out of the teens in my area, which is from eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England. But you can see how below normal we are. This is for Sunday morning. I'll just back it up and show you Saturday morning. The scale, if we read up the scale from the purples, it's -12 to -20. So we're talking basically 12 to 20 degrees below normal in this entire large area of purple that you see in east of the Mississippi. A little bit warmer than normal in Florida because the cold air doesn't really quite make it much further south than northern Florida, but maybe the next time around we get into this blocking pattern, that'll be a different story. And then it moderates a little bit as we go into Sunday, and still a little bit below normal by Sunday during the overnight Sunday night, with another core of below normal temperatures out through the middle and upper Mississippi Valley and Great Lakes. So the table is set here for this first shot of cold air, which will, at the end of the day, will wind up moving out. Now I'm going to, at this point, switch to the upper air. And I'm going to have to switch models as well. So we're going to go to the GFS. And we're going to go back to the North America view. Here's a view of the temperatures as far as the entire part of North America is concerned, the entire area of North America. Look at that, the large below normal temperatures in the east, near or above normal temperatures throughout much of the southwest, and west for a change with that ridge building, except right along the immediate coast. And over time, as we are now into Wednesday and Thursday of next week, we're not seeing a big return to those the warm-ups with the ridge in the east. You do get a brief warm-up on Friday before another weather front comes through, and it goes back below normal going into the weekend before Thanksgiving. And notice the buildup of cold air as we look up into Canada, that eventually translates its way down into the eastern two-thirds of the United States. It's a very potentially dynamic pattern that we're seeing developing. And I'm going to now go to the upper air, and I'll explain to you what's going on here. We'll put up the upper air. Okay, so by now, if you've watched me long enough, you know where the ridges and troughs are. So we've got this trough from Hudson Bay down to the western lakes, representing the shot of cold air that we have now. I want you to pay attention to what's going on there and also what's going on in the Atlantic northward up into Greenland as we move through time. And I'm going to swing this around. Now here's where the pattern starts to relax across the most of the United States for next week, where things are relatively quiet. You've got some action up in the west, in the northwest specifically. But as we go into the weekend before Thanksgiving, pressures start rising up near Greenland. That is the developing block that models are forecasting. And you can see what happens as we go deeper and deeper into the long range. Look how far south the jet stream is. Coming into California, you've got an upper low little vortex that's sitting up in northern Indiana, another low that's sitting just east of Newfoundland. One of the key areas to look for in a blocking pattern is what we call the 50-50 low, a low at 50 degrees north, 50 degrees west. In a blocking pattern, when that happens, it can open the door for storm development in the eastern part of the United States. So we're going to have to watch this very closely. And the models have been very consistent with this blocking pattern developing. That's what is impressing me, and particularly the GFS, which is, showing very, very strong blocking in the long range. Now, let me explain to you what blocking actually means. Think about the fact that we've got this natural progression of weather systems across the United States from west to east. The further south you go in this world, the warmer it is. The relative to just in general. If everything was flowing from west to east, the further south you would go, the warmer you would find the temperatures. The further north, the colder. But what blocking does, it basically displaces everything southward in terms of the jet stream. Rather than have lower than normal pressures across the Arctic regions where you would find your colder air, instead you have higher than normal pressures that develop across the Arctic regions, and particularly when you see a blocking high developing over Greenland. What this does is that it suppresses the jet stream much further south of normal. Your storm tracks wind up being further south, and you have a source of cold air from the North Atlantic and eastern Canada that gets funneled down into the eastern part of the United States. And in a case like this, if this were literally correct, it would get drawn down all the way to Florida. So this is going to be very important to see if it plays out this way, because if this is the case, blocking patterns like this can last. They can be of short duration. They could last for a couple of weeks, or in the case of the winter of 2010-2011, they lasted pretty much for about 2 months with this type of pattern. So we'll have to see, because if that's the case, then we could certainly are going to see an early round of cold weather, and I think we'll also wind up seeing some early snowfalls in a lot of areas in the Northeast, and possibly even into parts of the mid-Atlantic states. This is the NAO index, which measures the North Atlantic oscillation. When it's positive, it means that pressures in the Arctic region lower, so you have a more normal west to east flow of weather systems. When it goes negative, that means that pressures in the North Atlantic and up in the polar regions there are higher than normal. So that suppresses the jet further south. And if you notice that it goes from being positive up until about the middle of next week, and then after that it crashes and goes strongly negative as we head into Thanksgiving week and toward Thanksgiving Day. And a number of them, all the models that I looked at have been very consistent with this. So very important. We're going to be watching the weather models very closely, even more closely than we usually do. I want to at least touch upon weather that's going on elsewhere right at this point. And let me bring up the U.S. We'll put up the precip, and I will not forget the Canadian Maritimes, nor will I forget Europe. We'll take a look there as well. So here's our U.S., and we did already do the East, so I want to look out in the Northwest where we continue to have these weather systems coming in, producing rains and snows, and that runs into next week. We have a couple of systems. One in particular for Wednesday into Thursday looks like it might be rather potent in some places. Ultimately, that translates, according to this run of the model, into a low that runs into the western lakes with some rain and snow in the northern plains. And then that drives to the eastern part of the United States. A number of models in the long range keep trying to show something developing in the east along about the weekend of the 18th, 19th. I'm not 100% convinced that it's going to happen in a way that it'll be problematic, but you do see it does, on this run, have a fairly deep low just east of Cape Cod. Now, this is early in the game. We're going to watch to see how this evolves. And then with that blocking signature, you get a low that moves out of the plains into northern Illinois, and then eventually sort of translates itself to the coast. If we've got this blocking pattern that's real and strong, and this system is something that's real, I would expect to see it further and further south with every model run. So that's something we're going to be watching. And again, it appears to me, looking at the surface view here, that we're going to have temperatures on the whole averaging near or below average once we get this blocking pattern in place. So now let's move to southeastern Canada, and we'll take a look at what the blocking pattern and its impact on the Canadian Maritimes and southeastern Canada. Of course, we do have this polar front moving through with rain and snow here going into the weekend as low pressure develops in Labrador, and then that pulls out. And then it looks like much of, at least the first part of next week, looks pretty quiet. It's not really until maybe even at the end of the week. Doesn't look like too much is happening. A little bit of rain in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, but no big deal. And then this is where, again, with this block, we're going to have to see what develops, and we'll probably see some changes in terms of what the models will show up for the Canadian Maritimes. So we're now into Thanksgiving week, U.S. Thanksgiving week, and we're seeing, you know, low pressures systems moving through. But I would just be very cautious about putting too much stock into this beyond the middle part of next week. We want to see what happens once the block gets established. And I've been hearing a lot from those of you who are watching from Europe, so I will not forget you. Let's take a look, and I'm looking at this for the first time today. So let's take a look at weather across Europe as we move through the weekend. You can see the area of showers that moves into parts of France and southern Germany, and even some snow again up in the Alps. Deep low pressure in the Mediterranean Sea moves to the Adriatic and strengthens. Looks like there could be some snows through the mountains of Italy as well. No big systems. Let me look back, by the way. We'll have the remnants of Tropical Storm Rena, and there it is right here. This is for Friday night into Saturday morning. It really doesn't amount to too much, so you're really not going to have too much impact with that. And then beyond, going through later next week, looks like some sort of a front maybe toward the end of next week, and some storminess going into the weekend that follows. Actually has a nice wrapped up little low here along about day 8 and 9, which is next Saturday, going into the English Channel and across southern England, and eventually up into northwestern Europe. So that's a pretty intense low there. When we look at the upper air over Europe and how when you have blocking in the United States, to see how that sets up for the upper air pattern in Europe. So this is at about the point where we have the blocking going on in the North Atlantic. You can see that you have a bit of a vortex and a jet that comes out from the northwest into Europe. So I would suspect that we'll probably see some colder air. And when we take a look at the temperature anomalies here, that might be a bit more valuable. And you can see a large portion of Europe actually winds up being below normal in this blocking pattern. Let me just back up. We'll start with today and tomorrow, and it looks pretty cold for England and Ireland this weekend. And overall, much of Europe is going to be near or below average in temperature as we move through the long-range period, except for maybe parts of Spain and France. but it looks cooler than average throughout a good chunk of the continent. So that takes care of Europe. We don't have any other tropical systems to worry about. So you know what? Let me bring myself up full screen at this point, and I'm going to join in on the conversation. So this blocking pattern is really important, guys. So let me just bring myself up to the top here, and let's get you down. So let me say a big hi to everyone. Hi to you got Scott Reese and Raymond and Pandaz is here. Danilo, Mark Carroll is here. So I'm going to roll back. I'm going to try to take some of your questions. And Raleigh Voigt from Hartford, Ryan Hastava, Delvin, of course, monitoring the audio as he usually does. All right, so Danielle with the Thanksgiving week winter storm potential. Here's the thing. Here's how I would approach this as a forecaster. And those of you who are watching, if you're a young forecaster, if you're just getting your feet wet with all of this, rather than focus on whatever model specifics that it's doing on the surface, try to get a grasp of what the overall pattern is with the upper air. I think that's far more important at this point than trying to figure out whether the models are correct in producing a storm in one place on one run and then someplace else on another. The overall pattern would certainly be bullish for colder than average temperatures and the possibility that there could be some early snows in parts of the Northeast when we get into Thanksgiving week. But you know, you could have all the blocking in the world, and you can have the greatest pattern you think that you think you could have. But if the troughs don't line up in the right place, you're not going to get the outcomes you think you're going to get. So that's why at this point it's kind of futile to get into specifics. Just recognize what the overall pattern is, and that it is potentially bullish for some early cold and early snow. Now, and the other question will be, this obviously will set itself up. Does it last for a week or so? Because usually blocking patterns are unstable and they sometimes only last a couple of weeks. Or is it something that's going to last longer than that? And we're not going to know the answer to that question until the block actually sets up, and even then we may not know. But certainly a very interesting pattern showing up, and a few people have been looking at the 2009-10 or 2010-11 as a possible analog. I'm not a big fan of analogs because they look the same, but they don't always act the same. But if you want to go back and look at something that's, quote, textbook, I think that's where you would probably look. Those blocking patterns lasted for quite a long time. Mark Carroll, if the polar vortex goes down to Florida, it has to battle with a subtropical sun. Okay, let's be clear, though. The polar vortex, you know, what we call the polar vortex, is not one to migrate all the way down to Florida, but the cold air will moderate, colder air drawn southward by low pressure aloft in New England and along the East Coast. Yes, that air will moderate, but you are going to get some, you would get some chilly air as a result of that upper air pattern that the model is showing. The important thing to focus on, however, is the fact that the jet itself is suppressed to the south. That's the most important thing here, and not the relative strength of any polar vortex at this point. Let's see. Ohio, Michigan getting snow because you live in Ohio. Pandaz, this kind of pattern might be pretty good for you. Just bear that in mind. So we'll see how it evolves, but I think it might be good for you. Kevin Francis, will I have any merchandise at the meet and greets? No, Kevin, I usually, you know, if you guys want to go to the Jostradamus store, I'll put the link up, but I usually don't bring stuff at, you know, when I do my library stuff, my library talks. But I will tell you that, by the way, speaking of which, like the next one, for those of you who are watching this from Long Island or nearby, Sunday, November the 12th, I will be at the North Babylon Library on Deer Park Avenue at 2 p.m. For a presentation on meteorology and the upcoming winter. So come on out if you're not busy on Sunday. North Babylon Library on Deer Park Avenue on Long Island. It's exit 51. on the LIE, if I remember correctly. And spend your Sunday afternoon, and we'll be talking about all things weather. And in the meantime, if you want to take a look at do some early Christmas shopping, you can go ahead and take a look at the Joe Stradamus store. Do I think this new possible pattern could bring snow to southern New England? Christopher, I think it's not. I think it's possible. But, you know, again, we have to wait and see how it all sets up. How strong is the block? And will we have any weather systems in play? You know, I've seen blocking patterns where it's just cold and dry. So we can't automatically assume that there's going to be something. I will say that if you want an early season snowfall and an early round of cold air, this is the pattern you need to see. How it plays out specifically remains to be seen. But if you want a pattern that favors an early arrival of wintertime in the east, this is it. Tony Mangello is on, and yeah, good to see you last night. Tony was at my talk at Middle Country Library last night, and we had a great time, and he will attest to it. If you would you come out to the library talks, we have fun, and we talk a lot of weather and other things. So by all means, North Babylon on Sunday, folks. Scott Reese, do we have a lot of strong confidence here because everyone seems to be buying the model's runs? I see a lot of agreement with GFS and Euro. Yeah, I do actually. I've waited several days past what I started seeing chatter about this, 5-6 days ago, but I really waited till today to kind of cinch it. It's been model run after model run after model run, and the fact that the European and the GFS are kind of in sync here to a large degree. I mean, the details, there's always going to be some variation in the details, but they're in sync, and they're certainly in sync enough that I'm feeling pretty confident that we're going to go down this particular road. Some of you stated the Miller pattern A or B showing some of the biggest storms for the Northeast. Well, there's all different ways. I mean, you have Miller A, Miller B. One of these days, maybe we'll talk about what that is and what it means. They are identifiers for certain types of storms and how they evolve. And one day, maybe when the weather is slow, we'll talk about that. Best pattern for Ohio snowstorms, Pandez? Well, it depends on where in Ohio. You can do well with a blocking pattern. You can also do well with a west to east pattern if you've got a deep trough that sets up, somewhere near Chicago, where you get lows that track up the Appalachians. That you can do well with. So this would be a pattern that I think that Ohio would do rather well, and could also make up for some of the winters you didn't have the last 2 years. On the Weather Channel, Scott Reese has jumped on board as well. Well, it's good to hear. Let's see. Central Ohio. Okay, so I'm just thinking I'm heading up to my house in Windham in the Catskills tomorrow. Bundle up there, 358 Bobcat, New York. You're going to be cold up there, but the cold air is going to move out. It'll start to moderate on Sunday. If you get there early enough, you might see some snow showers running around tomorrow morning. Won't amount to much, but that's always possible. And all right, so it looks like I think we got it all covered here. That went pretty good here. 30 minutes of conversation with regarding to the blocking pattern and things that we're going to see going forward. So we have some additional posts on the website, meteorologistjoecioffi.com. So you might want to check that the website posts out. And my compatriot Angry Ben has got his own version of this on on NYCWeatherNow.com, and you can check that website out as well. And of course, if you're on Long Island, you could look at WeatherLongIsland.com for all the latest. And glad to see some new subscribers joining. Those of you who are here today for the first time, welcome. We love having you, and please join in on the conversation whenever you'd like. You can subscribe, so this way you get notified. I do at least one live stream a day, And when we get into storm situations, probably wind up doing 2 or 3 in some cases, depending on what's going on. So thank you for being here. Thanks, everybody. Hope you had a great Thursday. We will see you tomorrow, and we will see you over the weekend as well.